After all these years, I finally took a trip to the UK, or rather England in particular, as Wales, Scotland and Northern Ireland didn't fit into the schedule. Maybe some other time. So I reached out to Todd from Todd's Workshop and Matt Easton, Scholar Gladiatoria. For those who've been living under a rock, I'll put the links to their channels in the description down below, but most of you probably know them. Todd kindly invited us over to his place to film there and provided a bunch of interesting things to take a look at. So here's part one of that. You'll see more shenanigans on their channels as well. Thanks for having us and providing all these interesting artifacts here. So these are odd weapons that the two of you have already taken a look at, but I haven't yet. And yeah, it's quite an interesting pile, so let's dig in.
So pick something up.
What even? Okay.
So what I've got to say about this, before we begin, is I made this in a bit of a hurry for a film with Matt. So the original one, and I'll give you a bit of background, they are based, they're North Italian, Milanese mostly, it seems to be about 1550, and we don't really know that much about them. But the original ones are all spring-loaded. There's about 5 or 6 in existence. So basically, it's like a flick spear. You just fold it out and everything deploys. The arms deploy, the blade deploys, everything. All the mechanism is built in. I did it in a hurry. I didn't have a chance to do that. So what I did was I just screwed it together. So the originals were not fixed together like this, okay? That you have to bear in mind. But it gives the idea behind the whole thing. And it's crazy. So 4 or 5 of them just have the head, which articulates. And there's one of them that I found which has the whole body that the whole shaft articulates as well. So there's 2 hinge joints in it. And then those deploy. Again, like I say, that is all automatic. So basically, most of them have a single shaft, and you just fold the head out, it locks into place, the arms throw out, and you're there. So it's literally, it's a flick spear. It's just boom, and you're there.
Well, it's great for quick deployment, but I feel like this is probably more reliable. This is probably stronger that way. Because the problem is always when you have these fancy mechanisms, it may be cool and everything may be quicker, but you're just introducing so many weak spots.
Yeah, for sure.
Like anything that's spring-loaded or anything that needs to fold in some kind of odd way is just much more likely to fail. I mean, I would guess that this was probably just one of those projects where a craftsman showed off, because there are a number of those in history.
Well, that's where well, we don't know the answer. That's the truth. That was kind of where I certainly started. Was that where you started, Matt?
A lot of people were wondering if this was a hunting weapon, okay? And I kind of, because people see these projections and think it's like a boar spear, but it's very, very different to a boar spear.
Yeah.
And so I kind of postulated that maybe it was something for carrying when you're mounted or in a carriage, and that you could then deploy if you needed to. Yeah. So that was where I landed.
I think from the comments, there seemed to be some fairly reliable comments in there, which seem to be that they are associated with bodyguards and cavalry. So I think what we settled on the most lightly was that it would be cavalry that have to deploy into position, and it's just too difficult to carry that over your back or whatever it is by horseback. But then when you leap off your horse, wham, you can whip it out, look cool as you like, and you're there.
I mean, I can see the intended purpose. It's just, I would be very worried about how durable it really is. Can this hold up to actual use? If you hit it with another weapon, is it going to fail?
Well, I've had an approach from a museum that has got an original one that will work with me on doing an exact reproduction. I haven't got around to doing that yet, but that is absolutely something that we have to do.
That would be fascinating, yeah.
Just wrapping this one up. Not a fan. Right. Throw that one away. No good at all. Pick something else.
Why is this so long?
So I'll give you a background again. So this is, it's just a regular kind of a rondel dagger, but it's just so very long. I think it was a 60 centimetre, yes it was, 60 centimetre blade, 2-foot blade. And it's based on one in the Cambridge Museum of Archaeology and Anthropology. Thoughts, and then Matt, this one's over to you, I think, really.
Excessive is my main thought. I mean, you're dealing with a short sword length pretty much at this point. And I can see that a dagger needs to have a certain minimum length. There's a lot of downward thrust, so if it enters here, it ideally would reach the heart. And this will come out other places, so I have no idea why on earth you would make it this long. If you had to suddenly draw this to defend yourself, it's like, hang on. You know, it's wild.
Yeah. So what we found was, from a user point of view, apart from the fact that just wearing it is going to get in the way more, and it's going to take longer to actually get out, like, be quite difficult to pull it out if you were in a wrestling situation. But what we found, it's very difficult to place the point as well, because you've got it's such a long lever that any deviation at the root here means the point ends up wildly off target. However, it has a couple of potential advantages. One is that if you're holding it this way round, you do now actually have an object which has a fair amount of striking force and reach to it.
It's just a terrible guard for that, in my opinion.
Well, yes, because the edge alignment is just gone. You can't feel it. But fighting in close, potentially sort of half-swording with it and using it as a bar, and this is done in a lot of the dagger treatises, so if you're defending like this, then it is easier having more blade to do that. However, these were never common. But there's a clue there's a clue with basillards. So basillards start out as little typical knife dagger size things, and particularly in England they get longer and longer and longer, and the reason seems to be that there is a law against wearing swords in the street in the city, but you were allowed to wear a dagger. So the basillards got bigger because this is a dagger, officer, this isn't a sword. And I wonder if that's part of that equation. It's like, oh no, it's a dagger, it's not a sword. But it means that if you come up against someone with a normal sized knife, like a kitchen knife, you're like, Crocodile Dundee moment, that's not a knife, this is a knife, So I think that, in literal terms, you've got longer reach. So I wouldn't want to have to fight against this. Even if it seems completely impractical, it's got so much reach that with a normal dagger, you're going to be at a disadvantage.
Well, what we found as well, we got two, I made wooden wasters of a regular size rondel and this size. And we got two fighters to go against each other. And it's pretty much as you said, if the guy is grappled and caught, by surprise, getting the knife out the scabbard was an issue, and the fight was over by the time he managed to get it out. However, if he had the knife out and the grapple wasn't too close, then he tended to win every time, or most times. So it's not as immediately silly as I felt it.
And very difficult to block against because it's longer than your arm's reach as well. So it does have some advantages and some disadvantages. It was never popular, it was never common, it's a totally weird weapon. But I think that it might have ultimately been about trying to get around the law.
That would make more sense to me, because the main use for a dagger is something that you can have on your person. So if something erupts, if suddenly someone starts something at the tavern or who knows where, in an alley, you've got something quick. That's not very quick.
No.
Next. So that's something that people often ask about. Sword breaker. With some rapier blades, I can kind of see that, like the English rapier that you have.
Or a small sword.
It's pretty thin. I can kind of see maybe if you managed to trap it there and just try to snap it like that, maybe. But trapping is more likely the scenario, and that would work quite well. I mean, due to the shape, they can go in pretty easily, but not out as much. It's like a man catcher for swords, so makes perfect sense.
Yeah, I mean, actually, I think Scal's right on the money there. I actually found it, as we concluded, I found it quite difficult to catch thrusts with it because you want to have the point forwards in order to intercept the incoming thrust. And what that does is it actually closes up the angle to get in there. So what I was finding is the blades they were coming in here and it was giving you a bit more friction, but the blades weren't actually going in. When the blades did go in, it was against cuts. And when the cut was coming in and you were specifically basically blocking it like that. So I actually found it worked better against cuts than against thrusts.
That makes sense.
But you look at the size of that, that is robust. And actually most left-hand daggers used with rapiers are quite puny, actually. They're quite small, they're quite dainty. That's a big old thing. And it does make me wonder if actually this wasn't partnered with a rapier to be used primarily against rapiers if it was primarily to be used against cut and thrust militaries.
Well, that was the conclusion we came to, really, in the end, because it worked better against cut and thrust. The other thing in terms of bulk, this bit here is the only structurally sound bit of the blade, obviously, there's nothing there. So that bit is not a dissimilar amount of metal to a regular kind of a left-hand dagger. So all of the rest of this has to be there to support the weirdo teeth, but actually, structurally, serves no purpose at all. And this piece is actually based fairly closely on one in the Wallace. This was rounded off for sparring. Interesting piece, but the other thing that was very notable about it was, yes, when you bound a blade, you think, oh, brilliant, job done. But actually now, your weapon is now disabled as well. So, and you're now attached to them, because the moment you disattach, they're now back in the fight again.
And in one situation, my sparring partner pulled their sword back and it pulled the dagger out of my hand because we locked on, but he had a better grip on his sword than I had on my dagger, and it just pulled the dagger out of my hand. So it was like, oh, great. I've just disarmed myself.
If you can't decide if you want a sword or a hammer, why not both?
Object of mystery. So this was based on a piece in the British Museum, and it actually has the arms of the Commonwealth, so it's like 1650 etched or engraved onto the quillen block here. However, it is without doubt an earlier weapon than that, so by quite a long way, maybe 150 years. So what it's not is a 1650 weapon, even though it's marked up as 1650. How it came to be, we'll never know.
And it's one of a pair.
And it's, well, yes, there's a very, very similar one in Leeds.
In the Royal Armouries, yeah. And the one in the Royal Armouries doesn't have the Commonwealth arms on it and has a different grip on it, but I think that they were part of a pair. And I think that's part of the clue. You think paired weapons?
Judicial dual blowing?
Exactly, yeah. That's my theory.
The thing is, with judicial weapons, you can do pretty much whatever you want, because both have the same.
Yeah.
So it's fair, even if the weapon is kind of garbage. Yeah. They both have a garbage weapon at that point. I mean, I wouldn't say it's garbage as such. It's just, I don't really see why. I mean,
Todd's looking quite insulted.
I'm not looking insulted. I'm kind of with you. It's 8.5 pounds in weight, which was more or less spot on to what the original was. Why?
And it's not long. Like normally, you know, for £8.5, you expect to get a big weapon in return, and it's shorter than a longsword.
But the thing is, in that sense, it doesn't even hit that hard because you've got one hand up by the grip because it's so heavy. Yeah. You're pivoting around that point. If it was £8.5 and you were holding at the end, that would be a different thing. Yeah, exactly. But so yes, of course, it hits hard, but it doesn't hit as hard as perhaps you think it should on stats.
Oh yeah, a regular pole hammer would definitely hit harder, I would say that. Now, the nice thing is with this, you pointed out earlier that this can bend, but I take a bend metal haft over a broken wooden haft because it still works. Like it may not be aligned quite as the way it was before, but it still works.
Caveat though, because I could only look at the object in the cabinet, and without metallurgical analysis, I don't know if that was iron or steel shaft. I opted for an iron shaft, which, as it turned out, did bend. It's not to say the original would have been steel. You know, it could well have been iron. We just don't know. It could have been steel as well. I managed to get the weight of this, like, really bang on within about 40 grams or something.
I have a historical theory, which I need to do more research to back up, of what these two weapons. I think they date to around the end of the Wars of the Roses through to Henry VIII's time. So we're talking about between about 1480 and 1510, something like that. I think their specialised tournament weapons were made as a pair, and I think that they were in one of the royal palaces or royal residences, and I suspect that they were looted by parliamentarians in the English Civil War, and they got split up. One ended up somehow in the armouries in the Tower of London, or perhaps that's where they originally started out, and the other one got used as some ceremonial thing, and that's why it ended up with the Commonwealth coat of arms on. I think they have some interesting history that we'll never know, but I think they stem from the late 15th, early 16th century.
I would agree.
As tournament weapons. And as Skall says, if for a tournament, it doesn't really matter whether the weapons are effective or not. And very often, tournament weapons are specifically designed to not be effective. You know, Lucerne hammers were given smaller heads for tournament reasons. In the deeds of Jacques de Leilang, one of his opponents complains that his poleaxe is a bit too pointy and a bit too spiky, and that's not really the done thing for these poleaxe fights. So, you know, a bit like modern bowhurt. Okay, it's a hardcore sport and it's, you know, all tough and this kind of stuff, but at the same time there are safety considerations or rules considerations. You know, there are some things you do, some things you don't do. It's a sport, and I think these are essentially sporting tournament weapons.
Tennis rackets of 1500. Nice.
Yeah, and then you've got this handy belt clip there. I can't really see wearing it like that.
Not only is it not a handy belt clip, because if you try and balance it there, it's so close.
Yeah, wouldn't work.
You know, it doesn't work. So whatever it is not a hanging hook.
No,
it's not for that.
Maybe they attached a banner to it or something. Who knows?
It's very difficult to say. It could have even been for mounting them onto something, yeah, to take off during the tournament, or it's very difficult to.
Could be.
But I would have thought they put them at a point where it actually hung, and it actually overbalances.
Right. Yeah, that's a weird thing. I was thinking like streamer, perhaps, just to be flashy. Yeah. So this buckler is fascinating.
Yeah.
It has a lot of design elements and very smart ones. Just all these bars that can trap things in certain ways. And I can imagine that actually doing quite a bit of damage to the sword blade. Like thrust kind of goes in here, is then redirected and then slides under the bar and then hits the rim and then it gets bent. That was terrible.
Much easier than a sword breaker dagger. I mean, this is just literally all you need to do is smash it onto the end of your opponent's sword and it will get stuck in there somewhere.
Again, we got people to fight with this. One of the things that I found interesting, his comment, was if you're going up against a rapier or a spear, the one thing you're trying to do is to stab with it, to thrust. And all of the methodology of your weapon is removed by this. So suddenly you have to think again about how to attack.
Yes, this would disable quite a lot. I mean, it has the usual disadvantage of a shield of this size. You need to actually hit the opponent's weapon, have it in the right spot and not fall for their feint and all that. But that's the case with any kind of smaller shield or buckler. But there's so much you can do. Like this hook here that can come in a number of ways.
So there were some questions about this hook because some people, curators and people studying examples in museums, of which we have several actually, have wondered whether this was for hanging on something, like hanging on your belt, or whether it was for hanging something off. So there's even there's some questions about hanging cloaks and also lanterns and stuff like this. But what we found was that this hook in the middle, actually the blade got stuck under it a number of times, didn't it?
Yeah, I can see that.
But again, one of the comment sets that was made was brilliant for a one-on-one duel. Yeah. But if you have any more than one opponent, suddenly the chance of you having your defence tied up with a rapier sticking out the end of it that nobody can pull out, suddenly you've lost that whole side of things. And so again, it's a bit like the sword breaker. There might be a bit more to it than you think. That one-on-one, awesome. One-on-two, total rubbish.
I do think that this is a civilian weapon though, and there's not a lot of evidence of this type of targa, the square rectangular bucklers being used in war. So I think that this is, and when I say civilian, I don't just mean duels. Law enforcement was also important at this time, so we do see certain weird weapons like the man catchers that you mentioned being deployed, because if everyone's walking around with rapiers and your job's to maintain the law, things like this could be really useful if you're a lawkeeper and you know that someone might try and shank you with a rapier.
I'm also thinking, as unpleasant as it generally would be to be smashed in the face with a buckler, this is even worse. Like, this would be really nasty. Yes, the old bike chain flail. Not an actual bike chain, obviously, but same kind of principle. So, this moves differently, of course.
Yeah.
Because it wants to constrain it in one plane.
It's like you have edge alignment with the flail.
Yeah.
So this, I think, was dated from memory about 1550. Came out of a HEMA Historica auction. I looked at it and I thought, that's fake, it's rubbish. And then I was flicking through 1400s book and it had a whole page on these type of chains. And I looked at that and I suddenly thought, okay, it's not made up. So at which point it became a weird weapon for myself and Matt. I can see there are reasons for it, that you have that kind of edge alignment. It's quite interesting because of that, it just lines itself up. So I don't suppose edge alignment with the mace really matters, but it has a directionability. You can change it to a certain extent. However, if you get things wrong and you hit sideways somehow, whatever it is, it's the end of the chain. So very definitely it has limitations, structural limitations. Advantages, Matt, you used it.
I'm not sure we really found any advantages, did we? We only found disadvantages. Well, I remember one thing. So sometimes with these kind of free-moving, sort of pendulum-like things, they bounce off the target. So if if you hit wood, but also presumably if you hit a human with one, it will sometimes bounce backwards. And one weird thing that happened is it was sometimes getting loops like that.
Yes.
And when that happened, it was like, it won't. A normal chain, you could just give it a quick, twizzle and it would come undone, or it wouldn't even get stuck in the first place. But because it could do that, that was a real problem. Maybe I'm forgetting, but I can't remember any distinct. I mean, it's a beautifully made thing and it looks cool. Yeah, it is. And again, in the Renaissance world, that's worth something.
Really
people might go, oh, wow, have you seen that guy's flail? It's I don't want to get hit by that, and that might have the effect that you want from it. But I think it's also a good reminder that short flails were a thing, and there are people around there on the interwebs saying that they didn't exist, and they definitely did, and they existed in Asia as well as in Europe. But why would you not make a normal chain? I mean, I would.
I have no idea, especially with this kind of head. I mean, there is no edge alignment. There are some cases in which I can kind of see it if you have some spikes on one end or who knows what.
Have you seen the axe flail? People actually splitting logs with it.
Oh yeah, that one. Yeah. That would actually work.
Exactly, that's the only situation where you needed edge alignment, where I could think it might be advantageous.
Because otherwise this doesn't really do anything you need, and it's potentially, it can break more easily. As I said, like any kind of lateral pressure here is bad news.
I think that was our conclusion. It was cool, it was largely pointless, over complex, and essentially a little bit delicate.
Yeah.
But my goodness, you look
pretty pommel.
The pommel's amazing.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really cool piece.
Yeah.
But I think I'd take a regular flail.
Yeah.
Yeah, so basically this is the antithesis of a sword. Where a sword is elegant and a prestige object, largely for nobles. You're
going to hurt its feelings. Come on, this is elegant.
Or mine.
Yes. Yeah.
It's my finest work, Scal. Come on.
Yeah, actually, now that I look it up closely, I was totally wrong. This is the finest piece.
Look at the filing.
I mean, it's fantastic. Unga bunga stick, basically, but with a little bit extra. Very nasty spikies. Yeah,
so this was basically based on Hussite flails, where they're taking agricultural tools and weaponising them, basically. And that was this. And we wanted to have a go, see what it did. Yeah, it was interesting about how it wrapped over. And so we were hitting a shield with it. And, your defensive posture to move your shield up to block your face, and the thing just comes straight over the top.
Even hitting the shield arm. So if you deliberately hit the top of the person's shield, that thing flips around at a huge speed and whacks the person on the inside of their arm. I mean, it's amazing. Which I just had never even thought of.
But that's part of the beauty of these weird weapons films, is you can postulate all you want. Go do it.
Yeah,
that's something that flexible weapons, I mean, they have their problems, but that's the one thing they do really well. They whip around, get you in places like, you can sometimes hit someone in the back of the head somehow by just extending a little bit past them.
We had some, padded sparring versions, and they not only do they hit hard, and it's quite difficult to pull the blow because you've got to accelerate the tip of this sort of thing, even if it's a padded one, and. It just works. I mean, if it works for threshing wheat, then it's going to work for hitting people, isn't it?
It would work well against armour, and it's just easy availability. You probably have a bunch of regular ones, so you can just attach spikes to them, and even if not,
simple thing to make.
The other beauty of it, in the Hussite kind of context, if you're fighting from something like one of those war wagons, then you can get angles with it. You can hit over in a way that makes it really useful. But additionally, if you're fighting against cavalry, if you've got a horseman moving at speed and you hit them just with a stick, for example, a lot of that energy is going to come back into you. Whereas with this, you can put all of your welly into it, and it's not going to transfer straight down the stick into you. So I think you can completely understand why the Hussites used them. and of course incredibly cheap.
Every farm worker is going to have a flail. And so actually when you want instant weapons, you've got 2 hours work and you've got a really fearsome weapon. You know?
Yeah.
And they're already used to swinging them around, so not that you need specific techniques, but familiarity is still going to help.
One thing I've always found, and we also found in this film with these spikes, is they virtually never go into the thing they hit, because they never really hit perpendicular.
Angle,
yeah, if they've got any angle on them, just like with edge alignment with a sword, it kind of deflects off. So although these look really fearsome, they don't actually do as much damage as the spikes don't do as much damage as you think they will.
They will probably rip flesh off rather than pierce. And still, I mean, it's a little bit more to get a purchase on armor instead of glancing off.
No, that'll do nothing to armor.
Yeah, but it might transfer some more of the energy in the same way to as a coronel might with a poleaxe.
Yeah, probably.
Or
not as good.
Into mail, plate it would do nothing.
Oh, yeah, that against mail, that pretty much doesn't really protect you much at all. So yeah, brutal.
Weird weapons. There you have it. That's what Matt and I are up to when you're not looking.
Who doesn't love weird weapons, right? Even if they're not great, they're good to talk about.
Well, they're interesting. That's the bottom line. Is you find
thanks for bringing them out, Todd, and talking about them and commenting on them too, Matt.
My pleasure, always my
fun.
pleasure.
Hope you had fun too.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. And see you again. Cheers, guys.